We are having a bit of a crisis at the moment where we have really smart entrepreneurs, those who are willing to have a go and starting a business, thinking about leaving Australia and relocating to a more tax favorable jurisdiction. So the implications is massive.
Welcome back to Digital Dividends, Dan. We're into our second episode. Really enjoying hearing about your background, your career, some of the lovely aspects of your nature where you're looking to bring people along and help others and coordinate these community groups. Did you enjoy the first episode?
Yeah, love it. And thanks for having me back.
You bet. You bet. Well, look, you only get a second invite if you played nicely. So here we are. I wanted to expand on that first conversation. We've had this federal budget be proposed. There's a whole range of tax measures that have got the business community up in arms. We've got pretty low business confidence. I think the index for that was about as low as it's been for a few years, very recently. What's your take on some of that? Just broad brushstrokes. We don't need to jump in the technical detail, but what are your impressions of, say, the CGT, for example? And remembering that a lot of our listeners are business owners. There'll be small business owners as well, some larger, but those capital gains tax, it was often in the context of housing and investment properties, but actually a lot of that's going to affect other assets, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're having the biggest tax changes that we've had in the last 20, 30 years. So it's going to be an enormous shift for investors as well as business owners. And there's a lot of ripple-on effects. So we've been talking a lot about small business owners, but those changes will affect everybody. So investors, mum and dad investors investing on a stock exchange. There's also talk about how that's going to change people ideas of whether they invest in different asset classes, whether they delay starting their own business. Just recently, I had a client, a small startup, and they have an awesome idea. So they, I think I could say this because it's already gone live, but they introducing a drink that's made out of mushrooms. So it's an energy drink.
Yeah.
And it looks awesome. They manufacture that in New Zealand and sell it to Australia. So because of all these tax changes, they were talking about relocating, so changing their home residency to move to New Zealand.
Yes, that's no capital gains tax.
Yeah. So those conversations are happening in the background because of these changes.
Yeah.
So, we are having a bit of a crisis at the moment where we have really smart entrepreneurs, those who are willing to have a go and starting a business, thinking about leaving Australia, taking their family with them and relocating to a more tax favorable jurisdiction. So the implications is massive.
I know two founders of successful businesses that are mobile.
Yep.
And they both, one's relocated to Singapore and the other has relocated to UAE. Because they can work from anywhere. It'll take a little while for their domicile tax location to move with them, but they've made that move. And one took 4 children too. It's not like it's not without strings attached to it, but they're taking that move because their individual return is so potentially severely hampered for all their effort.
Yeah, and when I studied tax policy at UNSW for my master tax, we looked at how tax can change people's decisions. And one of the things that we always try to emphasize is how do we attract investors?
Yes.
There's a lot of countries out there in the world that have very smart tax regimes that have grown their economy. So for example, Ireland or Singapore, very classic example. Singapore, when it first started, didn't have any resources. It was the poor state of Malaysia. And because of their smart tax system, they were able to attract a lot of talents and attract a lot of businesses to Singapore. And now it's one of the thriving economies in our area.
Absolutely.
And that happened to Ireland as well. So same situation. So I think,
just touching on Ireland, I recall when they attracted Google to establish their head offices there, and then they pick up the gains on the consumption tax rather than the income tax side, don't they?
Exactly, yeah. So that's the sort of thing that we should be looking at as a nation to have the smarter tax system. We've got to think about more than just one thing. So the current change that we have is meant to help with housing, and that was the driver behind it. But I think what people forget is that tax affects so many different areas. We've got to look at it from a more holistic point of view and more long term. So it's not just about housing; it's about how do we help the economy grow, and how do we train talents and attract people who are savvy and business minded, so that we can live in a better country.
Yeah, I think there's a lack of nuance in these applications of these changes, and maybe hopefully it'll come out in the discussion on them. So they are very broad brush strokes, but it wouldn't be hard to carve out concessions for those people who are at the beginning of their business journey to say, if you take this risk, and a small business under 20 staff hires 50% of the Australian working population. We have this aging bubble coming through where fewer workers are going to be available to pay for the health and retirement needs of our older folks as they move through. And hey, they'd pay their taxes too, but the ability for us to look after them is actually going to collapse in the next 5 to 10 years. And there's no real, I found this budget in particular, not that we're an economics show, but as students and observers of it, I found it interesting. There was very little social or cultural commentary. It was only about houses and income and money. It was a really one-dimensional budget for me. I found that really a little shameful, actually. Are we just a country of property investors?
Yep.
Or people who need we need a home, but hey, there's more to the country than that. And we've got this budget coming through that is only talking about this one dimension of our society. I found it really lacking.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. The budget was very one-dimensional. They thought that they would be able to placate small business owners with a couple of tax incentives. So, your $300 tax offset, your concessions that they've introduced. But
they baked in the instant asset write-off, didn't they? Which is, wacky do. 20K goes a long way.
Yeah, I think it was a missed opportunity. It was a tax reform that we should have and we must have, but it was a missed opportunity to become more holistic and look at it from different facets. And I think we will have changes that will have to be introduced with the amendments of this legislation that come through. And I think that will happen, but that just makes it more complicated for people to understand tax.
So Dan, there's a lot there around lawmaking. Lawyers are involved in lawmaking, and then plus interpretation. But also, when you were at the ATO, you had a big idea, didn't you?
I was an auditor in the ATO, and one of the big problems is that we didn't have any oversight over trusts. We didn't know whether the distributions were reported by the beneficiaries. So my big idea was to include that as part of the supplementary section in the trust tax return, so that we have oversight as to whether distribution has been reported correctly. And I was involved in a lot of trust related cases. So I was involved in the ABC case. So that's the childcare centre. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and got a lot of involvement through.
Did you get to ride Neddy's helicopter?
Not quite. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I mean, look, I run out of a trust, so I'm glad you don't work for the ATO anymore. You're on our side.
Yeah.
You're on the other side of the fence. But I do want to talk about how the challenge from that is that the headlines of these changes are often misreported, an aspect of it's grabbed and amplified by the media. How do you navigate a world where sound bites and headlines and little short, sharp grabs define very large, complex bodies of information? Do you find customers are running to you or accountants are running to you, and often they're actually off the mark? They have this sort of sensational angle to what is actually a much more sedate or complete argument?
Yeah, I think probably 8 out of 10 clients that come to me these days would have a pre-prepared AI-generated tax advice, and they're looking for me to confirm that tax advice. So we tend to forget that AI is really just a large language model. So it's whatever, it's been reported on the internet, what people talk about. It hasn't had that fact checked, or hasn't checked, itself. So there's a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of things that needs to be ironed out. And with issues these days, it's just about helping clients to understand that the first thing is just to deal with, their lives. So often what I find with clients who are being audited by the ATO is that they have a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. So the first thing is just to talk to them, make sure that they understand that there's a pathway forward and options, and calm them down. And so I think that's where we still are needed as advisors, as opposed to them using AI instead of us.
Well, I think as the misinformation climbs, which it is already, I think there are Corporate clients who can afford good advice will continue seeking that advice, and they certainly should. What we're seeing in the marketing field is a rise in DIY workers or people having a go, extending further into areas where they have even less visibility as to whether they've started to strike upon an error or really amplify some problem for themselves that they're completely oblivious of, and the AI isn't going to tell them. Because one thing we see as very keen advocates of using AI where it should be used is if you aren't working in the tool frequently and you're not, as a lawyer, I could only imagine your agents that you would use would be completely informed over time of the context and the memory of what's good advice and what's not. You'd be feeding it full of legal cases, whereas mine isn't. Doesn't know anything about it. And so if I go and ask it a question, it'd be like asking an infant how to give me advice and this stuff. Do you see that in the briefs you get in?
Yeah, in somewhat. So you're right with clients who are corporate banks, so they usually have their own lawyers in-house. And the questions that they ask are usually more specific and typically a lot more technical. In terms of clients who are in a small, medium-sized market, their questions are usually to deal with broad issues, like under audit, or how do I change my business to make it more profitable? And I think that's the role that we are in at the moment. We're not just a lawyer anymore.
So having a long-term relationship is more valuable over time.
Yeah.
And do you find also if people are popping up with a crisis, obviously the solution is to get in there as soon as you suspect that's on the horizon, you start getting advice? My hunch is people probably come in a bit too late.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we come in a little bit too late compared to what accountants in that role and capacity, because with us, we typically don't get brought in unless there's a legal issue. And usually with a legal issue, you have a very tight deadline or time frame to act and help the client navigate it. So in my role, I try to be proactive in preempting the next stage of a business cycle, so that I can help the client rather than waiting for them to come to me when the legal issues have already arisen.
Yeah, and I think those changes and that accelerated rate of change is going to keep coming. But you're a real buff of history, and I think you've got some interests in, ancient histories, human development, evolution of society. Are there any analogies that you could draw for our listeners around major changes and even societal changes that we're sort of living among now that really might have happened before, and any instructive sort of observations from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got two. One I know personally, and one that's a bit unverified from one of my colleagues, but I thought it was interesting. Yes, I thought it was an interesting analogy. So one is so this is a tax analogy. Back in the 16th, 17th century, in England, they used to have a tax for windows.
Yeah.
So if a house has 2 or 3 windows, they get taxed a certain amount. And if the house doesn't have windows because it's small, it can't afford one, then they don't get taxed. So what happened after they introduced that tax was people start having no windows. They'd start just breaking up the windows. So that's the implications of tax in society. Tax is meant to be something that's not just part of what we do. It's not meant to change the way we do it. But that's what we forget with the federal budget, because it's changing the way we carry on business, our investment decisions.
I know a great example from the Vietnamese culture where they were taxing the length of the hull of a fishing vessel. And so that's how they came up with those round boats that actually have no actual spline down the middle of the boat. And they've learned to paddle these circular boats that just look like a lid, and they just go everywhere at once. But they would take them out as fishing boats and avoid taxes through that.
I actually didn't know about that, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. There's boats, I've seen them.
Yeah. They came about. There's a tax dodge.
Right. Yeah. So tax dodges back in the ancient days.
What's your other example?
The Cobra effect. So this is a analogy I've heard, but I haven't verified. Apparently, back in India, in the stages where English was still there, they had a crisis with too many snakes and cobras. So they were paying these snake catchers to catch cobras, and they were paying them on the number of cobras they caught. So after a while, these snake catchers realized that, well, what if we just breed these snakes, and then I can just bring it to them and make money rather than have to go out and find them in the wild. So they made a lot of money out of it. And then the English was like, hang on, we know what you're doing. Stop it. We're not going to pay you anymore. So they said, fine, we'll just go and release all our snakes.
The Brit snake.
Yeah, and so they still made a fortune out of it as well.
Get to catch the ones that.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So you sit from a really unique position of the intersection of some of the tax changes we're living with. You're working with the accountants, and of course they're working with business owners. So for our business owners, if you think forward 5 years as a reasonable sort of time frame, what are some of the biggest changes on the horizon, and what are the things that people can be doing today to prepare themselves for some of those changes?
Yeah, there's a lot of things happening and changing, and part of that's driven by the reforms that we've seen through the federal budget. So already we have a economy where the shining, residential property golden child is no longer the favoured approach. And people don't realize, but a lot of our businesses are somehow directly or indirectly connected to property. You have real estate agents, you have finance brokers, you have conveyancers, and a lot of these industry, if there's going to be a reduction in purchases of residential property, it's going to have a flow-on effect to other businesses. So what I think in the next 5 years is there going to be a lot of changes, particularly in Queensland, because we love property so much. There's a lot of pivot away from property, probably to more commercial properties as a more productive asset class. And there's going to be a lot of changes in ways that people conduct business. So, for example, there's been a lot of reliance on the CGT, and once they are out of that small business concession realm, they often rely on the CGT discount. But now there's going to be a lot more people.
So the capital gains tax.
Yeah. So a lot of people are probably going to be wanting to stay in one employer, one company longer.
That's right.
And it's probably because...
So reduce the number of occasions they're taking a return.
Yeah.
Stay in there longer so they get a hold of some of those holding concessions for the time.
Exactly, yeah. I think we're going to go through probably a downturn in the economy. It might have already happened. So that's going to change the way that people change jobs. So I think there's going to be a lot of people staying in one profession or one job for longer because they can't afford to switch around. I think what's happening is going to be a shift in people's attitude.
Businesses should hunker down, innovate within where they are, and what any suggestions for those business owners?
No, I think business owners should be a bit more proactive. As business owners, you probably notice you're so busy doing the operational side of it that you don't have time to think about what's the next step. We sort of have to react because there's so many things happening.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think this is a probably pivotal moment in the economy that we have to actually start to plan ahead, do a 5-10 year projection, look at your buffer, look at the structure that you're in, and plan ahead. We're still in that transition interim period at the moment where the law hasn't really changed across yet. So we still have time and we still have an opportunity to restructure if we need to and to change our plan.
So a good time to catch up with your accountant.
Yep.
Catch up with your solicitor.
Yep.
And go see your financial planner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Dan, for joining us. Really appreciate some of your wisdom and hear some of your story. And we'll hope to see you again sometime on Digital Dividends. Thank you.
Thanks so much.